Hello everyone, my name is Tom, and in this video we'll be discussing the Azerite system in World of Warcraft, my opinions on it as a whole, what issues the system currently has, and my suggestions for improving it going forward. I would first like to start off by making a content of all the topics I'll be bringing up in this video so that you may jump to them at your leisure if you're not interested in a particular topic. The points I'll be discussing in their order will be as follows: a recap over Legion's artifact power, a brief overview of how the Azerite system works and how it is a development on the Legion system, how I believe that Azerite has not been successful in Battle for Azeroth, how I see ideologies regarding infinite progressions, and how I believe that the Azerite system can be improved. I would also like to quickly shout out to the video BFA's Azerite Problem and How We Fix It by Taliesin Evitel on YouTube, as they cover a lot of the points in this video, as well as generally, they have some very interesting perspectives on how to improve the Azerite system, and it's well worth a watch. So, let's begin. In World of Warcraft Legion, a new system of progression was introduced in order to provide players with a long-lasting and an essentially indefinite form of progression in the form of artifact weapons. Lore-wise, they were powerful pieces of equipment with deep ties to the class or spec wielding them, and the system was implemented as a way to build upon that feeling of power. Blizzard had a goal of trying to ensure that players felt an attachment to their weapon, which they would carry with them throughout the expansion and build upon slowly to create a genuine feeling of progression with regards to player strength. The ways in which players were to gain this strength to empower their weapons was through a new system, namely artifact power. This essentially worked as an experience bar for your weapon, with each new level providing a new beneficial power to your character. Blizzard tried to make sure that the ways in which you could obtain artifact power were not through a singular source, but instead you could just play the game as you wanted to and you would be rewarded anyway. In essence, the goal was to make it so that it didn't matter whether you were a PvPer or PvEer, whatever you put time into would reward you in some way, with providing your weapon with more power. This did work to an extent, but Blizzard soon realised that there were players with far more commitment and determination than they had previously expected, with some people working out the most efficient ways to farm artifact power and doing that to excess in order to put themselves as far ahead of the curve as possible. This essentially culminated in running more of souls as many times as humanly possible, as it was the highest artifact power per hour farming method. Further down the line, Blizzard ended up adding a system wherein essentially an infinite progression was introduced in the form of concordance. This basically ended up being a case of, well, if you really want to farm it, you can, but don't expect any giant rewards. As somebody who raided the whole of Legion Mythic, I found myself constantly feeling as though I had to get the next new trait, eventually settling on 75 artifact power and then taking it easy as I obtained most of the worthwhile traits, and there wasn't much more to gain for the hours I would have to put in. This essentially was where most players ended up. Fast forward to the Battle for Azeroth, our artifact weapons are replaced by normal weaponry in Kul Tiras and Zandalar, and so we ditch the artifact power system for our new toy, namely the Heart of Azeroth. This is a neck item awarded to the players as they first enter the new continent, and is introduced as another gained power while you play kind of system, very much akin to the artifact power system. Blizzard and most of the player base soon realised towards the end of Legion that all of these powers we have obtained through our artifact weapons were going to be taken away from us, and that many classes would lose massive aspects that made up their class in Legion. Blizzard sought to rectify this by introducing Azerite powers, which were attached to helmets, shoulders, and chest armour in the Battle for Azeroth content. These essentially provided players with an option between traits that the armour provided, some being pure damage increases, others centered around survivability, healing, utility, or tanking. Ultimately, the goal of Azerite power was to provide players with a new progression system wherein you could power up your Heart of Azeroth necklace through playing the game in order to unlock these powerful traits. The progression that was the main selling point in Legion, therefore, is essentially split into one necessary piece of armour in the form of the Heart of Azeroth, and 3 interchangeable pieces of gear that would routinely be swapped out for other pieces in order to provide your character with the most benefit. It doesn't take a genius to notice that there are a few glaring faults right out of the gate, the first being a very obvious and fair concern coming from the player base. In Legion we are given a multitude of traits, most weapons having between 19 and 24 traits with varying amounts of points in each trait, and in Battle for Azeroth we essentially have the choice of a maximum of 3 options per piece of Azerite gear, totaling 9 choices as of October 2nd. The next point is that Azerite gear only offers most classes 1 trait choice for their spec and 1 neutral trait on the first row, and usually a mix of damage, tank, healing or utility traits on the second row. What this means is that the choice between what we can actually have is far lower than originally presented. Although 9 possible choices can be offered, most specs will realistically have 1 or 2 choices per piece of gear if they want to gain the most benefit out of that piece. This is a giant leap back from the power curve offered by Legion weapons and really doesn't do much in terms of providing you with a power increase, as almost all traits are passive and do nothing to change your playstyle. For example, X ability does Y amount more damage. Secondly, the Heart of Azeroth works in a similar way in the form of levels. Each level provides you with more access to those traits on your gear up to the current cap of 3 traits per piece, not including the item level increase. The issue with these levels is that they haven't improved upon the issue that was found in Legion, where people were overcommitting to gain levels in order to provide themselves with more benefits. In a similar vein to the Maw of Souls farming mentioned earlier, people have been devising new ways in which to farm Azerite power as quickly as possible to the highest possible level. People are still putting in hundreds of hours to Mythic Plus farming in order to get as many levels as possible. Another point which has been brought up in excess on the forums and discussions with the Blizzard Q&A staff is regarding how Azerite gear has been implemented, how there are essentially not enough ways to provide yourself with the gear that you want at a decent item level, and how the traits are kind of all over the place in terms of usefulness or how much benefit they actually provide to your character. From my understanding, there are projects in the works to try and rework how Azerite is being obtained, and especially making it so that better Azerite gear with the traits that you want is actually available to characters who want to farm it. But this hasn't changed the fact that for most of the expansions so far, there have been people who actually can't farm the gear that they wanted, because the only way to get it was quite literally a 1 in 100 chance as a reward for a weekly piece of content. However, as I pointed out before, this has been brought up in excess and it isn't the main focus of this video, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I'm using it as a point to show that Blizzard kind of dropped the ball on how Azerite gear has been implemented so far. Earlier I alluded to the infinite progression, and I made it a point at the start to discuss my ideologies on how I feel as though these systems should work. Let me first start by saying that I think that these systems that provide players with a way to sink their time if they want to put in more hours is great. There's something fundamentally rewarding about knowing that you have something that other people don't because you've put the hours in. I'd like to bring up an example to help illustrate my point of how I think the infinite systems have been done incorrectly so far. Firstly, we have to split content into 2 categories: things that players need to do and things that players want to do. Things like story scenarios, big events, and generally content that Blizzard put forward as optional things for the players to enjoy fall under the want category. The way that these things tend to work is that they're often time-gated to prevent players completing it too quickly, and to add a layer of story to the event. The Battle for Darkshore, for example, was carried out over a few weeks. Often people feel very frustrated by this time gating mechanic because it feels like an arbitrary way of Blizzard forcing you to wait an unnecessary amount of time for content that you want to do. Ultimately, the feeling that comes off of that is bad. If you offered players the whole story content via cinematics, in-game events, stories, etc., either as one whole package that they can binge and enjoy, or something that they need to be fed incrementally, I imagine most players would take the binge method, myself included. This is because the content is something that players actively want to do. It's something enjoyable that feeds into our fantasy surrounding the game. It's supposed to leave players with a feeling of, wow, that was sick, can't wait for the next thing they bring out. Next we move on to the needs section. In this analogy, Artifact Power and Heart of Azeroth levels fall under this category. Because Blizzard have made these systems so integral to how the game is to be played, and they quite literally change the in-between bits of your gameplay, i.e. the dungeon runs, raids, PvP, world content and questing, etc., they tend to feel like you need to do them in order to feel their benefits. What this creates is kind of an ugh feeling every time that you remember that you need to grind out more Azerite power in order to gain the next benefit. Now this is where the infinite progression system becomes important. Blizzard have made it clear that you can grind out these things if you want, and that there are multiple sources with which to do that. There is essentially no proper limit to how much you can do this, and there's no time gating. Some of you may already see where I'm going with this. The content that players actively want to do is being limited. Admittedly, I understand partially the need to limit that type of content, as production does take time, and that the content that players feel that they need to do is something that is, for all intensive purposes, unlimited. This culminates in a sour taste left in the mouth when you remember that to be efficient and provide your character with the progression that you need, you have to put in time to grind out this Azerite power. I'll concede the counterpoint that most of your gear's bigger bonuses are right at the start, and so grinding out for the 5 item levels that is awarded at the end of the gear isn't always necessary, but in terms of providing a progression, the last bonus will inevitably be something that players feel the need to get, whether it be right away or further down the line. Another fair point that I think is worth making is that the amount of Azerite required per week is decreasing, which simulates an easier and easier curve to get the power bonuses that you want. This certainly is a beneficial change, and I appreciate that this makes the grind a little less painful, but it does beg the question, why even make the system infinite if you're just going to keep making it easier and easier? So that's enough negatives for now. What do I think could be done to turn this system around? My biggest personal point is to change fundamentally the way that we receive Azerite power. The current situation falls under a gotta grind it all kind of sentiment, where I personally feel it would be better to introduce, in a similar vein to conquest points in the current expansion, a small, easy to reach cap that limits the amount of Azerite that you can obtain per week up to a maximum. This may not seem very logical, as it implies that the Azerite acquisition would slow down, but allow me to explain my point. I would argue that it makes more sense to generalize the trait level for the bonuses on your gear. The amount of Azerite could be accurately made so that it provides a bonus each week or something similar. For example's sake, let's just say that the cap is 10,000. I would suggest that you increase what every Azerite source offers by a decent margin, so that to people who really care about capping Azerite as their top priority, it could essentially be done in a day or two for the whole week. Again, using my hypothetical numbers, perhaps making it so that your 5 island expeditions provide you with 2.5k, your emissaries with 1.5k each, world quests could keep their 100 to 200 each, and so on, scaling it up to a level where it's reasonable to have a cap completed on multiple characters by the end of the week. Of course, all of these numbers would need to be changed and balanced, but the basic premise is that your cap would be easy to obtain and is limited. This would encourage players who were really keen to grind it out in a day. Casual players could do a little bit each day and still meet the cap. Nobody would feel this need to grind out Azerite wherever possible as a time sink, because past the cap there would be no point. I would also add that alts or people who join later into the expansion could have a catch-up system of sorts introduced when they may overstep the cap in order to get closer to the current maximum. Now, I'm more than happy to admit as well that this idea is by no means perfect, and I'm sure that some of you will have already spotted a few problems with it. My stance is that it's worth getting these ideas out, even if all they do is to serve inspiration for better ideas. Obviously, this whole discussion is just from the perspective of somebody who really does wish to see this game improved, and wishes for the whole system to be a success. Understandably, it's difficult creating a system that is perfect, and there are bound to be flaws with that system. I feel it's my job as somebody in the community to provide what little insight I can to the problem from the bottom up in order to assist Blizzard with ensuring this system doesn't go down as a big mistake in the grand scheme of the game. Thank you for listening to my rambling, if indeed you still are. I'm very interested in what the rest of you think, so I really do encourage you to post in the comments what, if anything, you agreed with or disagreed with. Whether or not this video turns into a series on WoW and my opinions or suggestions is also up to you. If you did enjoy this video and want to see more of it, let me know in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the future. Take care.